Hello, everybody. It's Two Bros Divided here. I'm Noah.
And I'm Luke.
And today we're going to be talking about different sleep setups.
Yeah, so we're going to be going over three primary sleep setups that people have used on the Divide, what our opinions are on them, the pros and cons of each. Really, the big three that we've seen is, first off, using a bivy sack and sleeping bag. Second, going into tent. And then the third one, really focusing on sleeping indoors. And then maybe having some sort of a tarp or emergency setup, essentially the hotel hopping side of things. Noah and I have had experience with each of these, so we'll go ahead and Noah will get started here with the pros, and then I'll mention some of the downsides, and at the end, we'll give our opinions and what some of the leaders have been doing and why we think we're doing that. So Noah, I'll let you take it away with bivvies.
Yeah, so like Luke said, I've got a bivy sack here. So just if you don't know, a bivy sack is pretty much a very simple tent without poles. So it's just pretty much rain fly or like a tube or whatnot. Some of them will come with like a pole or something to keep it like a little bit off your face so you're not completely like claustrophobic when you're trying to sleep. Some of them have this mesh mosquito netting. And a lot of times these guys are just going to be a very simple but like essential sleep setup to keep you out of the weather and keep you warm in some of the colder places. So some of the pros I really liked about the bivy sack is that I use it on my 2024 Tour Divide. By the way, some of the pros I really liked about it was it was super easy to set up. So really when you're getting into camp at night, you really don't want to be like messing around with whatever, something, trying to get it up in like 10, 15 minutes. That just feels like a waste of time after trying to cut time every other point of the day. So I just would just pull it out of my bag, throw it out and like air it out one time. And then boom, then you got your outer protection set up and ready to go. Another thing I really liked about it is there's nothing really to break on it. Had one pole, but it wasn't essential. So on races that are as long as the Tour Divide, you don't really want things that can be going wrong because sometimes they do go wrong and there's really nothing you can do about it. So yeah, so that was really simple and easy to fix or like easy to work with as well. Another thing was it was small, so I could fit it into the back of my Tailfin Aero Pack pretty easily, as long with the rest of my sleep setup with my bag, and then as well as my Thermarest that I use to keep me off the ground. But then the weight is also a bit lighter. I think that they're probably about half as much as tents usually, depending upon what tent you're getting, and they cost usually half as much, and if not more, depending upon what tent you're getting.
Yeah. And like Noah said, bivvies are great because they're light, they take very little room, they're cheap, easy to pack. But it's not all fairy hugs and unicorn kisses when it comes to bivvies. The downside is you don't have as much space like inside the bag because essentially it's a shell for your sleeping bag, right? So you don't have as much space to move around, wiggle around. If you're getting claustrophobic, that can be another. You kind of feel like you're trapped in there. If you've got a head covering to keep the bugs out. So that's just like the comfort side of things. Now, the other thing is in really bad weather, because I've used the bivy sack on, my 2016 is the 2016 Divide race and got caught in some really bad weather. They're not very good in really bad weather. So they're good 90% of the time, but that 10% of the time where you're stuck in, snow, rain, cold, something like that, you're going to end up getting wet, getting cold. And yeah, that's kind of why I found the downside of them. It's essentially just a shell to your sleeping bag. They're great in all the other races, but bad in really bad weather. You really want something like a tent or a hotel, which we'll talk about here as we get on, and some of the pros and cons. And it doesn't make sense to do a tent or a hotel for that matter as your primary strategy. But yeah, the main cons there, they're just not great in really bad weather. Outside of that, love them. They're great.
So moving on to the next strategy we're going to talk about is tents. So I've never used it on the tour, but I've used plenty of tents in my life, bikepacking. And I think that they're a great setup for, like Luke said, bad weather. When you're stuck in wind and you're stuck in a lot of sideways rain and whatnot, and you don't want to be dealing with like puddles getting up underneath you, and you're really just trying to get a good night's rest, tents are the way to go. They're the closest thing you're going to get to like a controlled environment with keeping some of the heat in with the rain fly and the bug netting as well, and also being breathable. And you don't really wake up the way you do sometimes with a bivy with condensation on the inside, just due to the fact that they are very breathable. The tents also, in my opinion, are really like, as compared to like hotels, I think they're definitely going to be cheaper in the long run. They also are going to be one of those things that are going to last. Tents can break, but a lot of times I've only broken a tent pole about once in my life. And and I've used them for over 300 days of outdoor sleeping. And I think that really they're a good thing that's going to get you really good sleep on long races like the Tour.
Yeah, and that's hit the main benefit there is you're probably going to have the best sleep in a tent. And we'll talk about hotels here in a second, but more often than not, tents are going to provide you the better sleep. You're out of the elements. You have at least a little shelf. Now, on the downside, some of the problems that I've seen with tents is one, yes, you can break them. You can't break a tent pole, and it kind of becomes a little useless after that. I mean, you're pretty much just in a tarp or a bivvy. You're just using the wind shell there. They're more expensive, so initially getting into them is going to be a bit more expensive. They also, and the two biggest parts of it is one, the weight, and they're going to be about double, almost, not quite. Some of the tents nowadays are getting lighter and lighter, but they're also becoming smaller and smaller. So at some point, what's a tent, what's a bivvy? There's that whole conversation to be had. But if we're looking at just like a traditional tent, they're going to be more expensive. They're going to take up more room in your bag, and they're going to be heavier. The more room in your bag is the big part. You have really limited room, when you're looking at your setup there. Where are you going to put it? The tent does take up quite a bit of room. And that's why we've actually seen some of the leaders and, non-leaders using the very minimal sleep strategy, kind of just going with the hotels. As Noah will talk about some of the advantages. Now, full disclosure here, Noah and I neither of us have ever used the hotel hopping as a primary strategy. We have stayed in hotels before, but not as like our main strategy, and especially not as on the Divide. And Noah will get into some of the reasons why you might consider that, and then I'll tell you all the reasons why you shouldn't.
Yeah, like Luke said, I mean, before that, the weather can be a factor, and there's nothing really that a thin wall of like Gore-Tex or neoprene can really do to keep you warm in certain scenarios if you don't have like super warm winter gear. So like it will snow on you sometimes in the Divide. It had to happen, I think, 2 nights this last year. And one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that you can't really dry stuff out when you're in your tent either. So if you're in the rain all day or your bivvy and you get everything soaking wet, a hotel, if you get checked in, get a hot shower, get everything cleaned off, you can prevent things like saddle sores by getting frequently like rinsing your clothes out, getting the salt and sweat and grime out of your gear and dirt. So that can prevent problems in the future by having access to cleaning and drying abilities. I remember when I would use hotels, I used 2 or 3 nights in the Divide. I think it was 3. Every single time I would come in, I would take all my clothes, like soak them in the sink for like 5 minutes and then dry them out. And that made a huge difference the next day as far as comfort and just like warm when you're getting stuff dried and whatnot. Another really nice thing about hotels, so when you get there, you actually don't have to unpack anything. So you just go in, jump, just like take a shower real quick, eat some food, and go to bed. You don't have to worry about taking your tent out, taking all your gear out and whatnot, unless you want to dry it and it's wet. So I think that can actually be a big advantage as well. I've seen people sometimes can save time in that regard if they're able to get their stuff just staying on their bike, so they don't have to mess with stuff too much, which can be a time suck as well. But yeah, that's the main thing about tents that's beneficial.
Yeah, or hotels. We already talked about tents. But yeah, so hotels, like Noah said, like they're great. You're able to get a really good night's sleep. You're able to dry out your gear, take a shower, do all that fun stuff. Now, that's also the downside of it, is hotels are really nice. They're really comfortable to stay in, and you want to stay in them for a lot longer than you probably should. So it's really easy to oversleep or to spend a few minutes fiddling with your gear when you really don't need to. It's hard to leave a nice, warm, dry hotel out into the rain. It's less hard to, crawl out of your sleeping bag and do it, that way. So that's the downside of the hotels, is primarily they're just going to be a huge time suck. You got to get in, you got to stay checked in, there's a lot of steps that come involved with that, as well as the cost, which, far be it for me to tell you what to do with your money, but they're going to be a lot more expensive. Additionally, and this is my main reason why I tried to avoid hotels, unless it just lined up perfectly, you're planning where you're going to stop around where the towns are, where the hotels are more specifically. So you're not going as you're not just going to a set time, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when it comes to like the overall strategy of biking to a set time and stopping. You're doing long days, short days, stopping early, waking up at 2 a.m. to ride just to kind of stay in the race. And you're not able to really like plan out where you want to sleep based on how you're feeling, the tactics of the race. It's more so just where the hotels are. So you're spending a lot of wasted time, not riding in the day, riding at 1 a.m. just to do the hotels. Plus they're more expensive. And, probably honestly, the reason that Noah and I never really did is that they were more expensive, but also we're very experienced with camping outdoors. So if you're not experienced with camping outdoors, that might be something to consider. And, we've actually seen here in the last handful of years, most of the leaders using a strategy where they're primarily using a hotel and then they're having an emergency sleep kit for when it doesn't work. Again, we just don't really see that, as being a successful strategy for us, but no, I'll eat into some of the opinions on why I think people are doing that, and we'll kind of have a little discussion there to finish it out.
Yeah, well, so the main reason I see it is I think Mike Hall was probably the first guy to like be really successful doing this. If you don't know Mike Hall, he's one of the grandfathers of the divide. A lot of people would say the best person to ever do it. I know Justina's just broke his record this year, but he was really the original guy to be super successful in these races. And what he would do is you just ride until you hit a hotel and you just like, you know what, this is where I'm going to sleep. And it really does cut down on a bit of weight and time. So if you're like not messing around and if you know how to race correctly, you can get in and out quickly and not really mess around with like packing and unpacking, and you can just have your stuff you wore that day dried out. And it can be really efficient if you know what you're doing.
I think that he's there, as Noah was mentioning, is like the efficiency. If you're using hotels 1 or 2 times without the divide, that's a luxury. I mean, the divide is miserable most of the time. So you get this like one hotel where you can like, I'll sleep in, and hey, maybe they even have continental breakfast. It's great. It makes you want to just like never leave. So like if you remove yourself from that mindset and you say, I'm staying in a hotel the majority of the nights that I'm on the divide, it kind of loses its appeal a little bit. Making you want to stay a bit longer than you probably should.
Yeah. And that's another thing that another reason why people would like hotels over tents and outdoor stuff is because you are outdoors. I mean, Luke's run into situations where he hasn't been able to sleep because of animals messing around. A lot of times, if you're not in bear country, you're in cow pasture. So there's going to be stuff that can wake you up. It's not going to be as good as sleep if you're not used to it. And I would highly recommend anybody that's planning on sleeping out for a majority of the divide to spend a few nights before, because every single noise the first 2 nights is going to wake you up. So being like, because you're on edge, you've heard all these stories about stuff, but I really think that your comfortability is going to be a huge factor in that as well. A lot of people just didn't like to be outside. They didn't really like to mess with, the elements. And I think that that's totally valid. If you can get better sleep, then I think that's why people do what they do with that particular issue.
Yeah. I mean, that's the takeaway here is you've got to be comfortable with your sleep setup, because you do have to sleep on the divide. Take it from me, it won't work out well if you try to do pretty much no sleep, but you got to be comfortable with it. If you're someone that spent a lot of time outdoors and you're comfortable in a tent, great, go with it. If you're not, and you're, really trying to avoid the outdoors as much as possible, plus if you got a whole bunch of dead presidents burning a hole in your pocket, the hotel might make sense. Now, as far as what we've done and what we're thinking about doing in the future, my first attempt, I did it with a tent, completed the race 20 odd days or so. And at the time, I was 16 when I did it the first time. I just kind of did whatever my dad said, and it worked out great. Now, the next year, that's when when I was 17, that's when I really gotten into, reading in about it, and, my call as well, because I did race against him, although I didn't see him anywhere but the start line. People like that using the ultralight setups, and that was kind of the era of ultralight. So I was convinced that I needed to do a bivy to save time, save weight, win the race, all that sort of stuff that was going through my head back then. And, first night out, I get woken up by a moose. not all that scary, but at the same time, it was like after an hour and a half of sleep, and I wake up and there's a moose right over my face. And I was like, I didn't need to see that. So I was freaked out. I got caught up with the mountain lion as well. And then you have the animal side, like Noah mentioned, you have the weather side. I ran into a situation outside of Lima, somewhere, southern Montana. Maybe it's Wyoming. Yeah, somewhere in that, kind of first stretch of the race where it was, pouring rain and then it turned into sleet and snow, and I tried to sleep and I crawled into my bivvy and I just got soaked and was near hypothermic, just shivering the entire time. With a tent, would it have been great? No, but I would have been able to at least sleep a few hours, get out of the weather for a little bit till it cooled off. A bivvy, you just really limited, or a tarp or, some sort of halfway setup. So, I mean, if I were to do it again, which I'm planning on doing it here in the next, year or two, if I were to race it again, I think my way that I go about it was a lightweight tent with around 2 pounds. I think, after having done both, that's the way to go. I don't necessarily have the money or the patience to try to plan out the hotel route. So I think I'd be going with a lightweight tent. But no, I guess what are your thoughts on that? What do you think you do again in the future?
Well, Luke and I agree on this one, actually. I think I would do like a really lightweight tent. I mean, maybe just like one pole, but yeah, around 2 pounds. Because I really do think that for me, I actually ended up losing about 30 minutes every day trying to dry my bivvy out because of the poor ventilation in my sleeping bag. So that's an issue I definitely I have with it. So I think that having something that's ventilated better and maybe a little warmer, like, because if you actually have a tent that's like going to keep the weather off of you, it's a little bit warmer, you can, make up air, you can lose some other pounds somewhere else. And I really think I would definitely do at least a bivvy again with like a good sleeping bag or a tent. I don't think I'd ever do a tarp in a race this long, and it's more of a safety issue for me. I think having some place to get out of the weather is extremely important, especially in Montana and some parts of Wyoming and Canada. I think that you can't skimp on that safety net because, like, if you are like hotel hopping, like planning on not needing something that can sustain the weather, I think that sometimes you'll need to, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it's like whether you're sitting in some half measure shivering and not sleeping, or you're sleeping like soundly and like a warmer thing can save you a lot of time in the end. So yeah, for that reason, I would probably do either like a warm bivvy with a pole or a really light tent.
Yeah, but of course, like we said here, it's whatever you're comfortable with. So let us know what you've done in the past. What has worked for you, what hasn't, or if you wanted to hear more in depth of any of these topics. I know in future videos we'll get into some of the stories we had on the divide and why I hate cows. That's coming up. Not to like throw that out there as a teaser, but it's a pretty good story. But anyways, again, really do appreciate all y'all tuning in and watching here. If you have any suggestions here for the future, throw them in the comments or shoot us an email. But outside of that, I'm Gary. Yeah, that's all I got.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, and like Luke said, the email will be in the description below. Thanks for watching.